But the story of the day, the story of the weekend in college football didn't happen on the field. Although I guess technically it did, because Florida State got smoked by Miami. Florida State on Sunday afternoon fired Willie Taggart, the head coach at Florida State. He was hired just a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, and he's out after, 19 games? 21 games, He finishes 9-12 overall. He was 4-5 this year. He went 5-7 last year. Last year was the first time since the early 1980s that Florida State had not made a bowl game. He promised change this year. It didn't come. And I'll tell you this. I'll just get right into it. This is one where I really don't have like a super strong opinion on. On the one hand, I am somebody that believes, I've been a college football fan my entire life, and I remember back in the day, it used to be you got to give a guy 4 years, right? You got to give a guy time to bring in a full cycle of recruits, give him time to put in his system, to do this, to do that, to do whatever. I would also say that has changed over the years. More and more guys are out after 3 years. I can't say that I ever remember a guy being gone after a year and a half before even 2 complete years, unless there was some kind of scandal, NCAA problem, whatever. I can never remember a coach leaving this early into his tenure, and Florida State's basically going to pay for it. They're going to pay almost $20 million in buyout money to get rid of Willie Taggart to leave as Florida State's head coach. So obviously, look, nobody's feeling that bad for Willie Taggart. And I'd say 2 things in defense of those who think that he should be gone. Again, I personally think it's a little bit early, but 2 things. 1, he wasn't that successful. And 2, as I myself have pointed out, right? So I spent all weekend on social media. I was watching the games, preparing for my radio show on Saturday night, preparing for this podcast. And I was very critical of Scott Frost in Nebraska. And I was very critical of Chad Morris at Arkansas. Both of those guys are second-year head coaches. And the reason I was critical was because I do believe that when you're the head coach of a major college football program, year 1 is just a total wash, right? Like anything can happen in year 1. Nick Saban lost to Louisiana Monroe in year 1. Urban Meyer didn't have a ton of success at Florida in year 1. So anything can happen in year 1. Ed Orgeron was good, but he has taken the program to another level in year 2 and year 3. So I bring that up because by year 2, you should, by this point in the season, we are now 10 weeks into the season. Most teams have played 9 games. You should be showing signs of improvement. And so I was really critical of Scott Frost over the weekend. I was really critical of Chad Morris over the weekend because, frankly, they're not showing any signs of improvement. And I think you could absolutely make the same case for Willie Taggart. Willie Taggart, like I said, he's 4-5. Now, I do think with 3 games left, he would have done enough to get to a bowl game. They play Boston College this weekend. They play an FCS school. Then they play Florida. Probably would have lost to Florida, but would win 2 games to get to 6-6. But when I look at the totality of things, the bottom line is that they are a very undisciplined, unorganized team that was in the top 5 nationally in penalties. They were struggling to move the ball. The offense really didn't get that much better, even though they spent a ton of money on their offensive coordinator in the offseason. And so I also see the argument that I myself have made, which is by the middle of year 2, you should be showing signs of progress. And by the way, say what you want about Jeremy Pruitt at Tennessee. That guy's won 3 out of his last 4 games. The only loss was at Alabama. That guy's showing signs of progress. Chip Kelly at UCLA has won 3 straight games. That guy is showing signs of progress. And so if a Florida State fan is listening to the show and they want to be critical of me because I'm saying I wouldn't have fired him in year 2, okay, I get it. Because you do have to show signs of progress, and it's very clear that Florida State wasn't. And apparently they had no reason to think it was going to get better. And so they let Willie Taggart go, and they're going to pay him a lot of money. Now, what I do think is interesting, I have found in my years of covering this stuff, as a general rule, when a head coach is fired this early, this unprecedented, again, we don't have coaches fired in the middle of their 2nd year when there is no major academic or major NCAA problems or anything like that. So it does make me wonder, is there something going on behind the scenes at Florida State more than that the boosters want Willie Taggart out? They got Willie Taggart out. do they already have potentially somebody else lined up? Now, it's interesting because the Florida State athletic director already came out and said, Urban Meyer's not a candidate here. We're not pursuing him. Now, granted, he also said we're supporting Willie Taggart. But I will say one name did come to mind to me when all this happened. Now, a lot of people publicly have linked Mark Stoops to this job, and I'll get to Mark Stoops in a second. I was thinking about friend of the Aaron Torres Sports Podcast, Bob Stoops, when I heard that this job opened. And let me explain why. For those of you guys who listen to every single episode, Bob Stoops came on about a month ago. He was promoting his book. I'll be honest, I don't think he liked me. I don't know why. I mean, come on, I'm awesome, right? Like, I don't know who wouldn't like AT, but I don't think he really liked me. But towards the end of the interview, I did ask him a question because he's coaching in the new XFL this spring. And I said to him, like, point blank, like, is this a potential opportunity for you to get back into coaching and maybe back into the college game? And I think he was a little confused, and I think he thought that I was saying that he was using the XFL to kind of boost him up so that he could get a college job again, which I wasn't. But the point being is that when I did ask him about a college job, he wasn't really saying no to what I was asking. And I think it's interesting because in life, what I'll tell you that I've found is this. So much of these coaching moves are about timing, right? For a young coach, sometimes when you're on your way up, do you feel like you've plateaued? Do you feel like you've done enough? For an older coach, sometimes it's as simple as you're happy where you're at. Your family's happy where you're at. You don't want to pull your kids out of school. You don't want to start over. You got a good thing going, which we'll get into Mark Stoops for a second. Bob Stoops is at a really interesting kind of point and crossroads in his life, for lack of a better term, in that he's been out of coaching for now, I believe this is his fourth season, third or fourth, whatever it is. And what's interesting about it is his kids are now out of the house. And so when he retired, it was because he wanted to spend more time with his family. And not to get too dark here, but it's in his book, so I'll just say it, is that he did say, his father kind of, for lack of a better term, I'm just going to say it, literally died on the sidelines. He had a heart attack while he was coaching a game. And Bob Stoops in his book explained, I didn't want that to be me. But he's been out 3 years now. His kids are out of the house. And he's even said, there's only so much golf that you can play. And so I'm starting to wonder, is this the kind of thing where maybe Florida State behind the scenes kind of heard, hey, Bob Stoops might be, if this thing opens up, Bob Stoops might be interested. On the flip side, Florida State may be thinking, we got to get a jump on this because there are two championship Hall of Fame coaches, Bob Stoops and Urban Meyer, available. And if we wait until USC fires their coach, which we're going to get into in a minute, if we wait until some of these other moves are made, these guys might not be available. So to me, I just think based on what I had heard from Bob Stoops when he was on the show, I don't claim to have any insight beyond his conversation and reading his book and talking to people that know him, but I think Bob Stoops could be a real candidate for this job. Now, what I would say, I don't buy necessarily that Mark Stoops is a candidate for this job. And Mark Stoops is the first name that has kind of come up outside of Bob Stoops and Urban Meyer, because Mark Stoops obviously has a really long track record, one in Southern Florida. He coached at both Miami and Florida State, but then specifically with Florida State. For people who don't know, and I'm guessing most everybody listening to this podcast would know, but prior to coming to Kentucky as the head coach, he was the defensive coordinator at Florida State under Jimbo Fisher. And so when I look at it in the big picture, I think it's very logical to put Mark Stoops in the category of a candidate. I'm not saying he's not. I'm not claiming that I know him well enough to know if he would be interested in leaving. I'll leave that to the KSR guys and Nick Roush and Jack Pilgrim. Those are my guys that cover Kentucky football. They might have a better answer than I would. But what I would tell you is this. If I was Mark Stoops, I'd be very careful. And this is why I don't know that he would want to go right now. Because first of all, from Florida State's perspective, they're going to pay Willie Taggart $20 million. Mark Stoops has close to a $2 million buyout. And he already makes almost $5 million a year. So you're now talking about $20 million for the last coach, $2 million just to get Mark Stoops to campus. Then you got to pay him at least as good money as Kentucky's paying him, if not better. And then the question becomes, now we're talking about like $30 million just next year to get Mark Stoops. And he's going to want a 6 or 7 year contract because he's leaving a great deal at Kentucky. But I look at it from Mark Stoops' perspective, and I wonder, do you really want to leave Kentucky right now? Now, I'm not saying that he's going to end his career there, and it was one thing I thought it was really interesting that over the course of the interview with Bob Stoops, he kind of talked about the process of, did he, I asked Bob Stoops, like, what advice would you have for Mark as you kind of continue your career, as he continues his career? And Bob Stoops kind of said, like, I would never tell him what to do, but if you're happy, don't mess with happiness. And so I bring that up because Mark Stoops has a pretty good thing going at Kentucky right now. The program's winning well. He's been there, I think, 7 years. And it's his baby. It's he's established it. And so to give that all up, and again, maybe he just feels like it's time to move on. I really don't know. But to give all that up when you're making $5 million a year to go to Florida State, and here's the part that matters, to go to Florida State where they just fired the previous coach, didn't even give him 2 years. So now you're talking about, you go to Florida State, what if that place is a bigger mess than you realize? What if you get to Florida State and you realize it's going to take 3, 4, 5 years to really turn this thing around? And they just fired the last guy after a year and a half. And so to me, that's the big thing with Mark Stoops. Again, I'm not claiming to know whether he wants that job or whether he considers himself a candidate or whether he's going to take a call or whatever. What I would tell you is this. I know that in the coaching profession, a lot of jobs that we as fans think are these incredible jobs that everybody wants, well, Florida State's in a little bit of a cluster right now. Keep in mind, they missed a bowl game last year. People forget that the year Jimbo Fisher left, they went 6-6. They had to reschedule a game just to get to 6-6 to go to a bowl game. So it's not as though they were at that elite level even when Jimbo Fisher was there towards the end. And so you add that in with the fact that they just fired a coach after a year and a half, that they're a total mess, that they're not getting better. I'm just saying, I don't know if I'm Mark Stoops that I want to give up everything that I've built at Kentucky to go to Florida State where they just fired the guy after a year and a half.